My question is for Mr. Rove. What is the future of the party, more specifically in terms of diversifying the party? As we've seen, that was the biggest issue next to the economy. Can you please talk on that issue?
Okay, let's hold that question and collect a couple more just because we're having this microphone problem. The young lady of 2 rows down, eyeglasses.
This is for Mr. Jenkins and Mr. Weisberg. You've criticized President Bush for going to war with Iraq. If President Bush had not decided to go to war with Iraq and had only decided to go to war with Afghanistan to fight terrorism, do you think Saddam Hussein would have A, remained a neutral and impartial observer in the war between Islamic terrorists in the West, B, allied with the United States in an effort to stamp out Islamic terrorists and bring democracy to Afghanistan, or C, grown a dangerous supporter and protector of Islamic terrorists, including al-Qaeda and others?
Simon and Jacob, why don't you take that?
Well, we have a problem here. I just don't see terrorism as a state projected force in the way that you do. I regard it in the sense that the question was trying to ask before, as a criminal act of gangsters roaming the world and badly in need of curtailing by their own governments. I think the way we treated international terrorism is to glorify it, to give it the status of a state. We've given huge recruiting energy to those people who want to bring young people into this particular odious fold. And I think by declaring war on some governments, I may say not all governments that harbour them, we've accorded them a status wholly beyond what they deserve. I believe that my country and your country has overstated this threat. I just think we've overdone it. And in overdoing it, we turned very large numbers of countries, particularly in the Islamic world, into state menaces. They themselves are undermined by the states we've given to these people, Pakistan being a classic case of that. This is quite a cosmic question. If you declare a very small group of people to be an international menace, you turn them into a sort of hero, and we've done that, and it's been a terrible, terrible mistake.
Jacob.
Mr. Rove mentioned somewhere in that incredible litany of distortions that that I was in favor of getting rid of Saddam Hussein. It was, as were a lot of sensible people. I didn't happen to favor doing it the way Bush did, largely unilaterally, rejecting allies as opposed to building pressure on Saddam and not waiting for the inspection process to play out. But I think the point is, and what we've subsequently learned, and the problem I had that Bush didn't have was I did not have access to analysts from the Department of Energy trying to tell everybody that those aluminum tubes were not for nuclear weapons. But the point is that Saddam had been successfully disarmed and was being successfully contained. And he was not supporting international terrorism because he was afraid to. He was a miscalculator, a serial miscalculator, but he was not a madman. And I think he understood very clearly that supporting terrorism against the United States would have resulted in the same thing that happened anyway, his destruction. I think what would have happened if we didn't invade Iran? I'd actually like to turn the question around a little bit and ask Bill Kristol, for example, does he, knowing what we know now, still think invading Iraq would make sense? But I think that that we might have ended up having to take military action against Saddam Hussein at some point in the future, but I think we could have done it with allies. I think we could have done it in a more thought-out way, and I think we could have planned for an occupation. It could have been expected if we knew we were going to have to do it.
Bill, I think that question to you was more than rhetorical, but I want you to take 20 seconds to answer it.
I think Karl is right that the president would not, in fact, have gone to war if he had known what seems to have been the case, that Saddam had no real functioning weapons of mass destruction programs at the time. Having said that, so I think as an analytical matter, Karl's certainly right. The American political system wouldn't have supported it. No, I think it was right to go to war to remove Saddam. I think the Middle East would be incredibly much more dangerous if he or his sons were in power. I think every radical state and every radical group would be empowered because weakness is what empowers them, and he would have stood down, in effect, the U.S. and the UN and the civilized world. It's inconceivable we could have kept the sanctions up. They were already fraying. It's inconceivable. The inspectors were only in because we moved 150,000 troops next door. They would have gone out. It would have been a horrible defeat for the West, and I think we would have had a much more resurgent radicalism in the Islamic world than we have today, where I think it's a mixed bag, but actually in many respects the terror groups are on the defensive and on the run.
Karl Rove, you had a question. You had a question, Karl Rove, about the future of the party, particularly in its ability to be more diverse.
Well, after a loss, every political party goes through a period of introspection and rebuilding, and the Republicans have to do that this time. Let's be clear, though, about what happened in this election, and that is that Barack Obama got 3.1% more than Al Gore got in 2000. This was not the blowout that you might expect given the conditions of the economy and the unpopularity of the war. This was not a 60-40 victory. He got 53% of the vote. He got 7.1 million more votes than John Kerry got, and 4 out of every 5 were black or brown. And therein lies the challenge for the Republican Party. The party of Lincoln needs to make a concerted appeal for African American votes, knowing that in the short term it is going to pay off not one twit. And in the long run, it has a moral obligation as a great political party to represent all Americans. And it can only do that by making the case to African Americans and Latinos. And the Republicans have a similar problem brewing among Latinos. George Bush got 44% of the vote among Latinos. John McCain, who was a courageous early advocate of immigration reform, got 31. We cannot take the largest, fastest growing minority in America and write it off like we did with African Americans. And then we also have a problem with young, because let's be candid, the war has turned young voters 18 to 29 against the war. They voted for Obama by 2 to 1, and they not only were against the war, they're against the Republicans. And those three, the Republicans have got to work on. But on the other hand, the Republicans had a victory, had a defeat this year that was not the blowout, and it was also the victory for Obama that was not as big as anticipated. Take, for example, Ronald Reagan in 1980. When he got elected, he brought in 100 state senators with him, net, and 300 members of state houses. This time around, Barack Obama brought in a net of 10 state senators and 94 House members. This was an individual victory for a charismatic, articulate, inspiring individual, an historical figure, and the Democrats are going to make a mistake if they think this is some kind of gigantic swing to their party.
We're heading down the home stretch on questions from the audience. Where the mic is positioned now in the camera, and halfway up to the left, the red sleeve. I'm sorry, because I'm rather blinded by the lights. I'm seeing the colors of sleeves. I'll take you over there first.
Okay, as I tried to say before, my question is for Mr. Jenkins or Weisberg. Some will say that George W. Bush's most difficult decision, and maybe most courageous, is to treat terrorism as a war and not a criminal act. I ask you, we've had decades to judge these. Please name me the difficult and courageous decisions made by Lyndon Baines Johnson and Jimmy Carter that have been proven to be the right ones, please.
All right, and up here.
Mr. Jenkins, I watched Prime Minister's Questions on Wednesday morning, and the UK outlawed anchor babies as a way to curb illegal immigration. Do you think that will work here in America, and what does the panelists think?
I'm gonna pass on that question, I'm afraid, because it's actually not on our topic tonight, with respect, but thank you very much. And I want to ask the cameraman to pivot to his right, and there's a man in a blue shirt.
To Simon and Jacob, how would you describe Bush's prosecution of the Iraq War, and his rationale for the Iraq War, versus the rationale and prosecution of the Vietnam War by JFK, LBJ, and Nixon?
All right.
And what differences do you see in how those two conflicts have been resolved?
It seems as though those two questions actually come together, so I'm going to go for a third one. The gentleman whom I can see clearly in the bright light with his hand up. Hold on one moment. Okay.
Just one simple question. First of all, thank you all for coming here. I'm curious if an aspect of the success of the Bush presidency is his foreign policy and his defending us against the terrorism, then how do you explain the fact that no one's caught Osama bin Laden at this point, the chief architect of the act that set all this off?
Karl Rove?
Because he is hiding in a deep, dark cave in a very dark corner of, in all likelihood, Pakistan. And to suggest that not every effort has been made to get him is inaccurate. Every effort has been made to get him, to get at his communications, to get at his allies, to get at his subordinates, to get at his inner circle. A lot of them are dead, and we aren't hearing much from him. And but we got to recognize we're dealing with an odd part of the world. This is not, as Simon alluded to, this is not a state, and it operates through states. The Taliban controlled a state, Afghanistan, that harbored and trained and gave succor to these terrorists, but they live in an odd and dark part of the world that is not a state, and it's what makes destroying al-Qaeda's leadership and our relationship with Pakistan both two very problematic things.